Okay, good evening. Thank you all for coming. I'm John McWilliams, and I'm a resident fellow at the Center on Global Energy Policy here at Columbia. Before coming here about 6 months ago, I was Associate Deputy Secretary of Energy at the Department of Energy. And so it's a pleasure to be here with you today. We're going to have a presentation and a discussion of the IEA World Energy Investment 2017 report, which is the second IEA benchmark analysis of energy investment. Those of you that have seen it, and you'll see it here, it's particularly interesting because in a capital-intensive industry like this, the investment decisions that are taken today really help tell you where the industry is going to go down the road. So it's a window into the future a little bit. And as you'll see, I think, in the very interesting slides that Laszlo is going to walk through. We are honored to have Laszlo Varro, the chief economist at IEA, with us this evening. And I'm going to introduce him in a minute. Let me just, from a housekeeping perspective, say that this event, like all of our events at the center, is being webcast live, and both the full video and the podcast recording is available on our website and iTunes in the coming days. And for those of you that are watching online, as well as the people in the audience, you can ask questions today for us at any time using hashtag CGEP events or our Twitter handle, which is at Columbia U University. So it is a real pleasure to have Laszlo here. He worked at the International Energy Agency he's worked there since 2011 and has become the agency's chief economist at the start of 2016, taking over from Fadi, who we know well. And as a chief economist, Laszlo heads the Economics and Investment Office, which is a newly created group within IEA that aims to offer sound, consistent energy economics and methodological support for the agency's work. Before this role, he served as the head of gas, coal, and power markets. And before joining IEA, he was the director for strategy development. We were just chatting about it at the MOL Group. Is that MOL Group? MOL Group. From 2000 to 2005, he worked as the head of price regulation at the Hungarian Energy Office. He's a Hungarian national, and he started his career at the National Bank of Hungary after completing graduate degree at the University of Cambridge and Corvinus University in Budapest. So, Laszlo, welcome to Columbia. Thank you very much, and we're delighted to have your remarks.
Well, thank you very much for the kind introduction, and ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to be with you here and share some of the insights that we got when we looked at the state of play of energy investment. Of course, energy is a very capital-intensive industry, and in many countries there is no shortage of creative ideas of what the government would like to achieve in the energy sector. And very often the difference between success and failure is the ability of the policy environment to mobilize investment for those objectives. Now, at the International Energy Agency, we have been looking at energy investment for a while. We have had different IEA work streams asking different questions. We have had IEA work which asked the question how investment in the energy sector could evolve if governments implemented certain policies. We also had IEA work asking the question how investment in the energy sector should evolve to reach certain environmental objectives. Both of these questions are important and relevant, but in this work we took a different approach. We took a don't shoot the messenger approach, and we took a hard look at what is happening on the ground, what is the state of play of energy investment. So what we are talking about is around 2.2% of global GDP, or $1,700 billion. That's the scale of energy investment in the global economy. That has been declining for 2 years. In 2016, the decline was 12%. Now, the most important component of the global investment decline is the reaction of the oil and gas industry to persistent low oil prices, which was a harsh wave of investment cuts. And as a result of a marked decline of oil and gas upstream investment, last year a very interesting milestone was reached, namely that for the first time since Edison and Rockefeller, total capital investment in the electricity sector exceeded capital investment in the oil and gas business globally. For 100 years, oil and gas was by far the largest investment area. By 2016, electricity was ahead. Now, given that there is a powerful cyclical component in the oil and gas investment decline, we are not sure whether this is a permanent structural shift or whether this is a once-off, but certainly it shows the rapidly rising importance of electricity in the global energy system. One interesting and very positive phenomenon that despite the headwind of persistent low fossil fuel prices, and I should also add that as low gas prices and increasingly cheap renewables feed into power systems, electricity prices also declined in many important power systems. But despite the low prices, investment into efficient end-use technologies has been increasing quite dynamically. That's a very positive phenomenon, but not obvious why it happened, because Microeconomics 101 would tell you that low energy prices should hurt energy efficiency investment. So something more than Microeconomics 101 is in play. And there is a component of energy investment which is very small, but it is important precisely it is very small, and that is low carbon investment outside the electricity sector. And we should keep in mind that electricity represents maybe 1/4 of total final energy consumption. There are some fluctuations country by country, but 1/4 is a useful rule of thumb. But this 1/4 absorbs around 90% of the total investment into renewable energy. In fact, the majority of renewable energy investment is just 3 technologies: wind power, solar power, and hydropower. And as the power name suggests, these are all power generation technologies. So the impact of renewable investment is highly asymmetrical. The impact of renewables is a genuinely disruptive game changer in the electricity sector, but the impact of renewables in the other parts of energy consumption, everything like in energy use in the heavy industry, aviation, trucking, building heating, there the impact of renewables is still marginal. Now, in terms of where the money is coming from, one of the lessons that I found interesting doing the number crunching for this report is that my impression is that there is a somewhat excessive excitement about project financing in energy. There's a project financing in energy is a very frequent topic of discussion. You have conferences, workshops dedicated to that topic. Now, project financing does play an important and useful role for certain type of energy technologies. LNG facilities often rely on project financing. Pipelines often rely on project financing. But overall, it represents only 7% of total energy investment. 93% is coming from the balance sheet of someone. So I think we should also have a careful consideration of the ability of energy companies and the abilities of other investors to maintain investment from their own balance sheet. Now, whose balance sheet is that and whose pocket the money is coming from? Well, if you add together the national oil companies of the Middle East with the state-owned electric utilities all across Asia, almost half of total energy investment is coming from state companies' budget sources one way or the other. So the importance of state investment is quite significant, and it has been rising recently. And you have an 11% component of total energy investment, and this is 11% of a very large amount of money, which is coming from completely outside the corporate sector as we define it in macroeconomic statistics. This is primarily middle-class citizens spending their own private savings to buy a solar panel on their rooftop. So these non-corporate energy investments now represent 11% of the total. But of course, in some regions, like in California or in Germany, it is much more than 11%. But even the global average has reached now 11%. Now, around 98% of the total capital investment is going into putting steel into the ground and building facilities with already existing technologies. and roughly 2% is committed into research and innovation and trying to develop something new. I have to say that I've been in the IEA since 2011, and during that period of time, there were several high-profile political initiatives to accelerate innovation and technological progress in the energy sector. And after these several high-profile political initiatives, this is what we found when we assessed the innovation activity. So unfortunately, those high-level political initiatives have not yet been followed up with effective budget allocations. I also have to say that the perception, which is sometimes comes in the media about the private sector, which is very innovative and running ahead, and governments which are lagging behind, is not supported by the data. The large majority of clean energy innovation and R&D is funded from government sources. Now, in this respect, we made a methodological decision that we classified the large state-owned energy corporations of China as public R&D spending, because the way China organizes research and development, that some of the activities which would be undertaken by a national lab in the United States is done by state-owned companies in China. Now, China is increasing its clean energy R&D spending at a quite dynamic rate. In the US context, let me emphasize that while state-level policies play an important and useful role in the deployment of already mature low-carbon technologies, in terms of path-making research and developing new technologies, the role of the federal government is absolutely essential. And the scale of the clean energy investment is such that if I take Amazon, Microsoft, and Google, these three companies have a significantly higher R&D budget than the entire energy industry, everybody from ExxonMobil to the Chinese electricity industry. So when you see in the IEA's assessment of clean energy progress that the majority of technologies are flashing red with an insufficiently rapid technological progress, that in our view is not independent of the stagnation of resources. Within the private sector, venture capital investment in renewable energy has been declining in the past 5 years. Now, there is an explosion by a factor of 100 of venture capital investment into self-driving car software. But I have to say that I'm not at all convinced that self-driving cars are the most important energy technology from a sustainability point of view. But of course, from the point of view of the venture capital industry, which is looking for the next Facebook, the next $500 billion platform, from their point of view, it makes perfect sense to focus on that. As I mentioned to you, the best positive surprise is the resilience of investment into efficient end-use technologies. And this is very much reflected in the data, especially in the electricity sector, where in practically every industrialized country, including the United States, the current recovery from the financial crisis is associated with a much, much weaker growth of electricity consumption than what a quote-unquote conventional energy economics model would predict. This is a relatively recent phenomenon. So if you take the historical period between the internet bubble recession and the financial crisis just a decade ago, during that period there was still a powerful relationship between GDP growth and electricity consumption growth in the United States, and that relationship has been very much broken. And we think that the most important component of that is the ratcheting up impact of efficiency standards on various electric appliances. We run the numbers for defining a so-called, we called it the standard middle class package. You know, the electric appliances like a refrigerator, a vacuum cleaner, a television, which we came to regard as almost like a basic human right for every family to have them. And the electricity consumption associated with this basic middle class package is now declining at the rate of 50 kilowatt hours per family per year, which if you multiply with 100 million families, that's a sizable amount of electricity. But in the electricity sector, we looked at the forgotten giant of the electricity industry, which is the electricity network. And in this respect, I must tell you that I have a friendly debate with some parts of the green community who have a somewhat unfortunate habit of talking about renewable energy and decentralized energy as if the two were the same. You know the story that India will never build a centralized network. They go directly to solar and batteries. I heard this story at least 5 times in different conferences. But very interestingly, when it is the Indian government, which is talking about India, but the Indian government is saying that thank you so much, we are going to build a proper centralized energy system in India covering the national territory of the country. And specifically in India, electricity network investment currently is 0.8% of GDP, and they are building 100,000 kilometers of new electricity lines every year. Now, decentralized small-scale solar facilities with batteries, they do play a role in rural regions of poor countries. So we estimated that last year around 8 million people in Africa got their first electricity without being connected to the electricity grid. This is very good, and this is a major step in development forward. But the large majority of renewable deployment is not decentralized at all. In fact, for wind, the technological progress is leading to larger and larger wind turbines. So wind is actually becoming less and less decentralized. And even in the case of solar, which can be decentralized, the majority of solar investment in the United States, in China, in India are large ground-based utility-scale solar plants, which from an electricity system point of view are power plants running with somewhat different technology, but they need an electricity network to deliver the electricity to the consumers. So this investment is around $250 billion a year. It is increasing, but its structure is shifting. So the construction-related activities in network development, so digging a trench for the cables, putting down steel pylons, that has been stagnating. There is a dynamic increase in activities which are related to electrical engineering, so transformers, substations, switching gears, and so on. And there is an explosion of capital spending associated with network-related IT. So that reached $30 billion, over 10% of electricity network investment, which is now the IT spending related to the electricity network. But one concern that we have is that, of course, electricity networks are regulated in practically every country, and in many countries, the network regulation failed to keep up with the technology changes in the electricity industry, and that has a risk of undermining the economic viability of the electricity network precisely at the time when the investment need is very significant. Now, from the power generation side, the most important new sources are now the low carbon sources. And this is the wind and solar revolution, which is certainly remarkable. And here I plotted it not in capacity terms, but in energy terms. So we basically run the numbers of what is the geographical distribution of the windmills and the solar panels that you deploy, and under normal weather conditions, how much electricity you get from a solar panel in Texas or from a windmill in northern China, and we calculated the energy footprint. And this energy footprint of the new renewable investment has increased by 50% from a constant capital investment. So renewable investment globally has been stagnating at the rate of roughly $300 billion per year with no structural increase. But this is like saying that I just bought a good laptop for $1,000. This is true today. This was true 5 years ago, and this was true 10 years ago as well. A good laptop is always $1,000. But you get a very different good laptop for your $1,000 due to technological progress. So the energy impact of the renewable investment is growing because of the improving wind and solar technology. Now, so far so good, and that's certainly a revolutionary change. However, we have the other two low-carbon technologies, the old workhorses that you are not supposed to mention in polite society, nuclear power and large hydropower. And when I plot the construction starts of the new nuclear plants and the construction starts of the new hydro plants and do the same exercise of running the numbers of how much electricity they will produce once they come online, this is what I get. And the picture suddenly changes, because what we see, instead of an astonishing low-carbon revolution, what we see is that the truly remarkable success of wind and solar was by and large able to compensate for the shortfalls in nuclear and hydro, but there is no sustained structural increase in the speed of deployment of low-carbon resources. Now, nuclear is in deep, deep trouble pretty much anywhere outside China, whereas in the case of hydro, there was two massive investment waves into hydropower, China and Brazil. In fact, the ramp-up of hydro in China and Brazil was comparable in energy terms to the increase of wind and solar globally. So it played a very important role in cleaning the energy system. In China, the remaining hydro capacity is in increasingly remote regions, difficult geographies, which require some very tricky infrastructure developments to utilize. Whereas in the case of Brazil, the very challenging political and financial situation of the past several years had a significant impact on energy investment. And we don't see any country or any region being able to take the mantle of China and Brazil in hydropower development. So overall, if you take all the new investment decisions, that's give or take 300 terawatt hours of new low carbon electricity, which we get from the new investment that we make, with no structural increase. And under normal macroeconomic conditions, global electricity consumption is growing around 500 terawatt hours a year. Because of course, Americans and Europeans buy more efficient refrigerators, but Indians buy their first refrigerator. And even though that first refrigerator that Indians buy, that's a more efficient refrigerator, but it is still the first refrigerator. So globally, we have a quite dynamic electricity demand increase, and this level of low carbon investment is sufficient to slow down the growth of conventional power generation globally, but it is nowhere near sufficient for a timely decarbonization of the energy system. Now, in conventional generation, perhaps the most important thing that we see is that a big wave of coal investment is coming to an end. So, this century there were two big victories over energy poverty: the electrification of the Chinese countryside and the electrification of the urban areas of India. Both of these victories were achieved on the back of coal, and at the peak of the investment wave, it was 2 large coal plants every week. Now, this went down to 1 coal plant per week, and by last year, it was around 1/3 of its peak. Now, these are the construction starts, the new investment decisions. It takes you maybe 5 years to build a large coal plant. So there's a very robust investment pipeline, and there are coal plants coming online all across Asia at a quite significant speed on the basis of investment decisions made 5 years ago. But on a forward-looking basis, there is certainly a major slowdown. I think in the case of China, this is a result of a specific policy by the National Energy Administration, which is increasingly concerned about excess capacity. Now, in China, electricity consumption growth has been slowing down because of structural changes in the economy, and there's a very large-scale deployment of low-carbon resources. So they have a traffic lights policy to prevent excessive overinvestment in coal capacity, which is proving to be effective. In the case of India, we think that this is a combination of financial stress in the utility sector, plus the increasing competitiveness of solar in the Indian energy system is increasingly affecting coal investment. Now, gas capacity investment is doing very well in North America, and it is doing very well in the Middle East. With a bit of a simplification, it is doing very well in regions that rely on cheap domestic gas. I'm going to show you instead the European numbers, but in the European case is quite interesting because Europe is facing a simultaneous decommissioning of coal and nuclear capacity, a quite robust deployment of both wind and solar, but Europe has a peak demand in 7 o'clock in the evening in December, where Europe is pitch dark, and all the solar panels produce precisely zero electricity. So we think that gas turbine capacity will play a very important role in European energy security for a quite considerable amount of time. And what we are seeing is a collapsing investment activity. And in fact, in every single year since the financial crisis, retirements and mothballings have exceeded the new investment decisions into gas capacity in Europe. Now, I started my energy career as an energy regulator, liberalizing energy markets and developing wholesale competition. So I found somewhat ironic that 20 years after embarking on this journey, a grand total of 3% of global power generation investment is based on wholesale markets. So when I take the big investment stories from solar power in China to onshore wind in the United States, by far the most popular business model is a good old school government regulation. So, nuclear power is 400 RMB per megawatt hour in China, wind power is 80 euros per megawatt hour in Europe, and so on. An emerging and increasingly important business model is capacity auctions, when you still have a fixed price long-term contract, but that fixed price is a result not of a government regulation, but an auction which you have to win in order to sell your product. That is playing an increasingly important role, especially for US renewables. US wind is the only renewable technology where market-based investment plays a meaningful role. And of course, distributed generation has a specific business model of its own. Now, given the quite remarkable success of wind and solar, we also looked at investment into things which would enable us to take that electricity to the other 75% of the energy system, which is today not electric. And one is electric heat pumps, which can replace gas in building heating, and the other is electric cars that can replace oil in the transportation sector. Now, both of them are growing very nicely, and both of them are gathering momentum. But I should warn you about the scale of things, that if I take all the electric heat pumps, if you wanted to heat those buildings with modern gas boilers, you would need around 2 billion cubic meters of gas compared to a global gas demand of 4,000 billion. And last year, global oil demand grew by 1.5 million barrels per day, of which electric cars cut off 10,000. And last year, global electricity consumption grew by 460 terawatt hours, to which electric cars added 1 terawatt hour. So the electrification of these end-use sectors has started. I do think that it will gather momentum, but it is in a very, very early stage. And specifically in the transportation sector, our energy technology team is increasingly optimistic about electric car technology, and we have been revising our electric car numbers up. And our oil market team has revised our oil demand numbers up as well. And as part of my job as a chief economist to ensure the consistency of the IEA's work, and I can assure you that this is 100% consistent, because the changes that are unfolding in the other 99% of the transportation sector. So when you have the market share of electric cars growing from 0.5% to 1%, but the remaining 99% switches to large, heavy cars that can eat up all the benefits from it. And there is a clear asymmetry in consumer behavior, because as an average consumer, you are not going to buy an inefficient refrigerator if your utility bill goes down, but you are going to buy a big monster SUV when the price of oil goes down. That the data very clearly shows a strong structural relationship between the market shares of different cars and the oil price. And I don't want to be unfair to American consumers. This is not only an American phenomenon. 7 million SUVs were sold in China last year. A couple of years ago, people thought that India will be dominated by very small cars. That would have been the concept of the Tata Nano, which proved to be a commercial failure. So the average size and the average weight of cars sold in India is also increasing. So this is a very powerful global phenomenon. So we think that there is a bit of a competition among green analysts of who can paint a more apocalyptic picture about the oil industry, that whether oil will be wiped out by next week or also by tomorrow morning. I think that that's somewhat simplistic. We think that it's going to be a long and hard journey to squeeze oil out from the transportation sector. And oil will remain a very, very important energy source for quite a long time. So we looked at very carefully the reaction of the oil and gas industry, which is a historically unprecedented wave of investment cuts, overall 20% in 2 years. Now, this year we see a modest recovery globally, but that's a two-speed recovery, which is something like a stagnation pretty much anywhere outside North America, and a roughly 50% jump in North American shale. That has shifted the structure of investment in favor of the US independents and the national oil companies, which maintain investment pretty well, and the other private sector is squeezed out. And whereas investment declined by roughly 50%, we have seen a cost deflation of roughly 20%. So So part of the investment costs were compensated by lower costs. Now, the cost deflation is a combination of technological progress in the industry. I have to say another thing which I continuously emphasize to my friends in the green community is that the evil empire has the most advanced technology in the known galaxy. The technological progress does not only benefit clean energy. There is a very rapid technological progress in the fossil fuel industry as well, and a very systematic and very determined application of modern IT. The US shale industry especially benefits from that and displayed an even more radical cost deflation in the past. Now, of course, the resilience of the US shale industry is an important story, but you probably know more about the United States than I do. So instead, I'm going to talk about another very resilient country, which is Russia, which definitely surprised us on the upside. Now, Russia in the past 3 years have faced significant challenges, low oil prices, financial stress, geopolitical conflict, American and European sanctions. Some project categories are certainly out of the game. So the Arctic offshore developments, which used to be a top strategic priority, are on hold. However, if you look at the type of projects that Rosneft wanted to do with ExxonMobil on the Kara Sea, very similar projects are also on hold in Alaska and in Canada as well. So Shell pulled out from the Alaska Arctic, Chevron pulled out from Canada Arctic offshore. Nobody implemented any sanctions on Canada. It is just simply the project economics became unviable. So at the same time, the Russians are focusing on things that they actually do very well and which make perfect sense. One is squeezing West Siberia harder. This is easily economic even in the current oil prices. This is something which the Russian service sector can do, so they don't need the cutting-edge American service capabilities. They don't need Halliburton or Schlumberger to squeeze West Siberia. Their costs are in ruble, so this plays an important role. Also, Russia is very strongly determined to become a major gas exporter to China. The construction of the Power of Siberia pipeline is currently progressing at the speed of 3 kilometers a day. Now, building a long pipeline through the Siberian wilderness is a tough job, but it's a type of difficulty that the Russians have tackled before. They know how to do it. They can do it from domestic resources. And I can also tell you that during my frequent visits to China, I never met anybody in Beijing who regarded Russia as an energy security risk for China. The prevalent view in the Chinese energy industry is that Russia is a useful strategic partner for China's energy supply. And last but not least, the gigantic Yamal LNG project, where the winning combination was essentially combining Chinese money with European and Japanese technology. So they lined up China's equity investment, Chinese project financing, plus Chiyoda, Siemens, Technip, so the entire European or Japanese technology expertise, and that gigantic project is going full speed ahead. Now, outside the United States and Russia, as well, we have seen a major strategic shift in the attitudes of the oil and gas industry. So US shale reached around 5% of global oil production, but it's not like that the other 95% remained unchanged, because there is a ready alternative for short cycle small projects which can generate a quick cash flow, and also it's almost impossible to have stranded assets from US shale or from other short cycle projects, because you can flexibly readjust your investment to demand. And the industry has responded to this outside the United States as well by refocusing on smaller, shorter cycle projects. So they reversed a several decade-long trend where the industry was moving to bigger and more complex projects. And in the past 3 years, the average size of a field which started field development declined by half, and the average project lead time declined to 3 years. So the highly technologically complex, decade-long, multi-billion-dollar projects are very much out of fashion, and the industry strategic focus is smaller size, short lead time, very cost-efficient projects. I have to say that I don't think that there is a significant stranded asset problem currently in the oil industry, even if a strong climate policy is implemented. I think that was a fair criticism in 2014 when the industry was spending huge amounts of money on very difficult, very capital-intensive projects. But the projects that survived the baptism of fire of the past 3 years are very unlikely to be stranded, in my view. So this is the story of energy investment, and I'm very happy to take your questions and comments. Thank you.
Do is retire over at the table, and then we'll. Thank you. So thank you, Laszlo. We're going to. I'll have a few questions and topics. I could sit here and talk for hours. I found that absolutely fascinating. But I want to make sure we have time for the audience to ask questions. What I found, particularly valuable about the presentation and the report. Was that it's so empirically based. And there are a lot of assertions made in this industry about change, things that are happening very quickly, things that either people want to happen or not to happen. But facts are stubborn things. And what I found so interesting about this is, and we'll touch on a couple of these, is that in many cases you actually paint a little bit of a contrarian picture, but it's grounded in the research that you've done. So I think it's a very valuable contribution. Maybe just start with a general question. I mean, I think most of us would acknowledge that the energy industry is in a period of major transformation. A lot of it's being technologically driven. There are other factors as well. But clearly it's having geopolitical implications, et cetera. And so the common view is that we are moving very quickly in many directions, including towards a lower carbon future. But at the same time, as you've stressed, the energy industry is a very capital-intensive industry. These projects take many years. First of all, investment, many years. There's not a shortage of capital in the world. But I guess my question for you is, do you see capital investment constraining the growth of certain segments of the energy industry, and particularly as we try to move towards a lower carbon? I'd be interested if you see capital actually investment being a constraining factor.
Well, I would say that I think it's not only the technological change which matters, but also the nature of technological change. And just tell you a concrete example of what I mean. If you look at the historical data, the ramp up of wind and solar in the past decade has actually been considerably slower than the ramp up of nuclear power was in the 1970s and the 1980s. So this notion that wind and solar is a historically unprecedented shift in the energy system is empirically not true. However, the very rapid ramp up of nuclear power at that time did not have a transformative impact on the business model of the electricity industry, because it was vertically integrated, regulated utilities deploying capital to various power generating technologies. And if the regulator and the government told them that, okay, oil is out, nuclear in, the same business model was evolving. And even from a technical system operation point of view, whether you have a steam turbine turned by a coal boiler or whether you have a steam turbine turned by a nuclear reactor, there's not an awful lot of difference from the point of view of how you operate the electricity system. Whereas the ramp up of wind and solar is unique, not from the point of view of the physical quantity of the energy, but from the point of view of the impact that it has on both of the business model of the industry and also on the technical operations of the energy system. Very similarly, in the oil and gas industry, the ramp up of US shale gas in physical quantities is comparable to the ramp up of the West Siberian supergiant fields in Soviet times. But the ramp up of the West Siberian supergiant fields was pretty usual what the industry has done before, whereas shale is just a completely different project category which has a completely different business approach. So certainly, I mean, capital is certainly not a constraint, but what is a constraint is finding a sustainable business model. And there I would highlight the electricity industry, where this classical microeconomics 101 business model of the industry that, you buy some primary fuel, you burn it, you sell the electricity, you make money in between the two, and you have your electricity market where you rank the different power plants and you get your supply curve. This microeconomics 101 business model is very widely considered to be broken, both in Europe and also in the United States. And some really fundamental questions are being asked of so how the electricity sector will be financed, and how you can make sure that you can have investment flowing into the type of assets that are nevertheless necessary for the system.
In that area, I mean, one of the slides that I found very disconcerting was when you, as you pointed out, that investment in global clean energy R&D has plateaued at about 26 billion. And so this whole question of how we're going to finance innovation, because if we don't finance this innovation, the things that we'd like to have happen 10 years from now simply won't happen. This is something we worked on quite a bit at the Department of Energy. Many of you are aware that we helped create something called Mission Innovation, where we got 20 countries together to pledge to double their R&D budgets in this area over 5 years. We'll see what happens. There have also been private sector efforts, Bill Gates, the Breakthrough Coalition, and others, really searching for new models. But so there are a couple of questions there I'd be interested in hearing your response to. One, you mentioned the fall off in venture capital funding in early stage R&D. I think about 2009 it peaked, and they've had some negative experiences. But are there new models that are going to be required, or is capital simply not going to flow into early stage R&D, and are we going to be disappointed a little bit down the road?
Sure. Well, I think so far, if I take the success stories, I mean, the success stories were based on a technology pull model. So basically, governments just creating a guaranteed market for certain type of energy technologies, which enabled mass manufacturing and enabled this learning by doing. That has proven to be quite successful in the case of wind, and that has proven to be just remarkably successful in the case of solar. Now, of course, in the case of solar, the governments who were frontrunners in financing the solar revolution had to realize that it is not their companies but the Chinese companies who ended up dominating the market. But from a global point of view, this doesn't matter. Now, for certain things that plays a useful role. I say that what is quite important that also we have to be not only proud of the big successes, but also have to be mindful of the failures, because some technologies just did not deliver. And for example, in my view, we need to ask some really hard questions about biofuels on the basis of the experience of the past decade, because that technology did not progress as rapidly as was previously hoped. There are some technologies which are at the stage, and I would put, let's say, electric cars running on lithium batteries, that in my view is in a stage which is ready to go. So there we can have Samsung, Panasonic, and the Chinese battery manufacturers running with the ball. And if we create the market for electric cars, I think they will do their job. However, there are also technologies, basically anything which could decarbonize heavy-duty transport, anything which could decarbonize aviation, anything which could deal with not the hourly but the monthly fluctuations of renewable production. That's, in my view, beyond of what we can reasonably expect from the private sector. And there, I mean, if you look around our modern world, the internet wouldn't exist without publicly funding R&D. Long distance aviation wouldn't exist without the U.S. Air Force. You have a very long list of things from our modern life which started their career with government-funded R&D. So in that, I don't think we should be shy, and I think we should take a hard line that governments have to play an important role.
Yeah, I mean, in the United States, as you know, early investment in basic science, research into basic science. Actually, the Department of Energy is the largest funder in the United States. And as you said, governments have been involved, particularly in this country and other countries, from the very beginning of innovation, which is why some of these proposed budget cuts in the science area is concerning to many of us. Let me ask you on electricity. I was, again, another slide that I I just found fascinating is your slide that talked about electricity demand stagnation, at least in Europe and in the U.S., and we're seeing that in developed economies for the reasons you identified in terms of efficiency. I wonder if you think that's going to last, or if that may change for a couple of reasons. One, there are about 1.2 billion people in the world that don't have regular access to electricity. There's 600 million people in sub-Saharan Africa that don't have regular access to electricity. We at the same, so the energy density is going to increase in those parts of the world, but also I wonder whether as electric vehicles increase, as the world becomes more digitized, et cetera, do you think we're in a temporary period, or do you think this is a trend that we'll continue to see?
Well, first of all, on a global basis, there's absolutely no doubt that global electricity consumption is increasing.
Okay, yeah.
And of course, that's a combination of improving energy access, so people getting their first electricity, and also people who already had electricity consuming more. But some of the efficiency, I mean, for me, for example, the most promising efficiency success story is the LED light program in India, which has a macroeconomically measurable impact. I mean, I'm talking about 40 million tons of coal not burned in Indian coal-fired power plants because of the very large-scale rollout of LED lights. So even you can, now, there is no conceivable efficiency policy which could cause electricity consumption stagnating in India. There's absolutely no doubt that Indian electricity consumption will increase, but whether it will increase by a factor of 3 or whether it will increase by a factor of 5, that's a huge difference.
The LED thing was fascinating because Goyal came and visited us at the energy department, and he was talking a couple years back about placing a 100 million order for bulbs and getting the unit cost from $10 to $1 bulb. And I have to say, he did it. They did it. Yes. So it was extremely impressive what they've done.
Now, in industrialized countries, there is from electric cars, given they are incredibly efficient. Electric engines are incredibly efficient. So, as a ballpark estimate, 100 million electric cars in the United States would increase the national electricity consumption by around 8%. That's meaningful. But I mean, the U.S. power system easily has enough capacity to generate that. Where there is certainly a rapidly increasing electricity consumption associated with the IT sector. So, for example, wireless routers are electricity hogs. So as families switch to a lifestyle where everybody has a Wi-Fi in their home and they use it for broadband video streaming, that has a significant electricity footprint. But overall, even with electric cars and the IT sector, we expect a very, very, very slow demand increase in either the US or in Europe.
So turning to gas for a second, a slide that caught my eye was your gas retirements exceeding new investment by a wide margin. I wonder if you could get into that a little bit more, because on the surface, that would seem to fly in face of the idea of gas being, sort of the hottest fuel on the planet, a transition fuel to a lower carbon economy, et cetera. So maybe you could talk a little bit more about that. That was surprising to me.
So essentially, this is the European case where, a microeconomics 101 business model met a much more complex technological reality. So that was a European case where you had, again, very weak electricity demand, very robustly, very strongly growing renewables, and coal which just refused to die and remained in the European power system in a quite resilient fashion. And that really disrupted and really squeezed the business model of gas turbines. And very often, the electricity market design did not properly reflect the system value that a flexible modern gas turbine can produce. Now, there is improvement in this. So there is a very forward-looking, very structured discussion in Europe about electricity market design. And the problem is well recognized. But our modeling of how the European power system looks like has a significantly higher gas turbine capacity than what is the case today, and that will require a 21st century market design to deliver.
You mentioned that I think it surprised you as well a little bit, that project financing, looking worldwide, was really, I think, only 7% of the financing. Coming from a project financing background, and also in a country where energy assets are primarily owned by the private sector. That surprised me a little bit, but as I was reading that last night, I was thinking that I wonder if this is being influenced by the fact that so much of the development that we're going to see is in countries where energy assets are primarily owned by the state. Yep. And I wonder if you see that changing or changing at all, and sort of what the investment implications of that are.
Well, in electricity, certainly the almost all of the demand increase is taking place in countries which adopted the single buyer model, which means that you have a typically state-owned company which owns the electricity network, owns the backbone generation assets, and has a legal monopoly over supplying consumers. Very often the government is comfortable having private investment on a project-by-project basis for independent power producers, but those independent power producers sell their electricity to this single buyer entity which then serves the consumers. And in my experience, in most of these countries, there is a lot of political desire to make the state-owned single buyer more efficient, to improve its governance, to apply modern smart grid techniques in system operation. But there is absolutely no political appetite in most of these countries to privatize this entity or cut it into pieces, unbundle it, and so on. So I think the overall structure of the electricity industry in most countries will remain stable. Whereas on the oil side, of course, Saudi Arabia has a very ambitious reform program, including the IPO of Saudi Aramco, which just 2 or 3 years ago, it would have been very, very difficult to imagine a Saudi government going for an IPO of Saudi Aramco. So that is certainly a major strategic shift. But the exact implications of that remain to be seen.
So the other thing that made me wonder is certainly here in the States, we've seen the electricity industry undergoing pretty radical change, more in some states than others, but particularly the grid. And your report talks about how the grid is really moving from a classical electricity delivery system to a platform for data and other things. And as we're thinking about the implications of the smart grid and increasingly the business models required to create that investment, your report made me wonder if that's actually an aberration here in the United States and maybe certain places in Europe, that worldwide it will continue to be an integrated system because of the ownership of the states and basically a regulated model.
Well, basically well, first of all, the electricity networks are regulated in countries, in practically every country. The question is whether they are regulated as part of a vertically integrated entity, or whether they regulated as an unbundled entity which provides an infrastructure platform. Now, certainly, even in the United States, as far as I know, the states that have not done the unbundling in the 1990s don't seem to want to do it right now. So there seems to be a quite
California experience.
There seems to be a quite stable industry structure. Now there is a very interesting electricity reform unfolding in Japan, where they created OCTO, which is the coordination of system operation in Japan. They implemented a degree of unbundling. And also, given that Japan has a very advanced e-business culture, retail competition is actually picking up in Japan. And of course, there is also an intense policy debate in China about the future structure of the electricity sector. I would hesitate trying to predict what decisions the Chinese government would make. But there is a fair degree of unbundling already, because they have half a dozen large generator companies on the generator side, and they have State Grid of China and Southern China Grid as 2 gigantic network companies. So one possible direction for the evolution of the Chinese electricity system is state of China becoming an infrastructure platform. Well, that would require certain decisions by the Chinese government, but that's possible.
I mean, I find myself sort of wondering both ways whether this involvement by national governments will slow down or impede technological change, or whether it can accelerate it. And I could imagine in different countries it could go either way. One of the things those of us who have worked in China have seen is that because they have nationalized control, their leadership are largely engineers. They've made decisions. You know, we worked obviously with them over the last few years in the Obama administration to encourage them to get more and more involved in clean energy, and of course now they're leading in many of these areas. So that would be a case where probably accelerating quicker than, but I guess being a private markets person, I also believe in the power of the markets, and so I'm wondering how you're seeing that from an investment perspective.
Well, it depends, because certainly, I mean, even in China, the solar industry, which executed the most revolutionary change, that is largely private enterprises. The
state-owned.
But there is a very intense competition in the Chinese in the Chinese solar industry, whereas the infrastructure backbone, that's a natural monopoly, and there for the infrastructure backbone, I would highlight two quite important things in which China represents something like 2/3 of the global progress. One is the rolling out electric car recharging infrastructure. In the United States and also in Europe, a typical electric car buyer, early adopter electric car buyer, is an upper middle class professional living in the suburbs, having a suburban house, and charging on his or her garage, which means that eventually you will have to do some homework on the electricity infrastructure, but you can get to the first couple of percent piggybacking on the already existing infrastructure. Now, in an extremely densely populated Asian megacity, the typical early adopter is living on the 15th floor of a high-rise building, so you need a public infrastructure from day one. Now, if I take the total global investment into electric car recharging infrastructure, more than 2/3 of that is in China. And the other important technology is ultra-high voltage direct current transmission, which is essentially enables you to transport very large quantities of electricity over very long distances. For wind power from Inner Mongolia to Beijing, or solar power from Guangzhou to Shanghai, and so on. This technology has been known for decades, but China is the first country which is doing meaningful real infrastructure rollout for this technology. And that will create some completely new opportunities. So I mean, in the U.S. context, we don't really think about projects of supplying Los Angeles from Canada, because the infrastructure part just seems to be quite impossible. Now, some of the Chinese new infrastructure projects, I mean, Shanghai is supplied from the Xianjiaba hydro plant, which is further away from Shanghai than the Canadian border from Los Angeles. So that's and this is also. I think for a natural monopoly infrastructure backbone, certainly in the case of China, the two big grid companies have done a quite impressive job.
So why don't I end my questions here with one more and then turn it over, because I know the audience probably has a lot of questions for you. Sort of end where I started, which is I think we all see that the energy industry globally has entered a period of really rapid and probably unprecedented change. Lots of different factors going on. You, however, really are sitting there looking at the facts in a capital-intensive industry, and these investments are leading indicators for what's going to actually happen, not what we want to happen. So I'm just asking, as you're looking at all of this, do you find yourself believing that the change will take place more quickly than people are saying, or in fact a little bit slower than people think, that it won't be quite as dramatic? You mentioned in your report, for example, that the business model in oil and gas industry is also changing towards towards projects with more rapid paybacks. That sounds more conservative to me. than the big projects. So how do you sort of see it as you put it all together?
Well, I would say that I think based on the capital intensity of the industry, the changes are going to be quite slow and quite gradual, unless, and here's two unless, which are extremely challenging to incorporate into our top-down modeling. One is the type of asymmetrical technological change. So, for example, the way the self-driving car technology developments are just exploding. And that's important because theoretically you can build a self-driving internal combustion engine car, but it doesn't make any sense because the electric drivetrain has a high initial capital cost but a much lower operating cost. So consequently, when you have the very high utilization rate that these shared economy self-driving vehicles are likely to have, that will very strongly reinforce the economic advantages of the electric engine. Whereas in many energy technologies, we have seen this gradual 0.5% learning rate per year type progress. There's a huge degree of technological uncertainty over the self-driving car technology, but it is quite risky to bet against Google pulling off something. So that's one unless. The other unless is consumer behavior, and there, that energy might become less and less of a commodity. There, one very interesting thing was one of the recent shareholder assemblies of Apple, where one of the shareholders criticized Apple. Apple is a major investor into wind and solar power, and some of those wind and solar power investments are negative net present value because a Chinese factory could buy very cheap coal-fired electricity. And so some shareholders criticized this in the annual shareholder assembly, and Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, pushed back real hard and basically told them that a decarbonization of the supply chain is going to be a key part of Apple's brand identity, and anybody who doesn't like it should sell the shares in the company. That's it. Yeah. Now, you can, and we have seen that it took 5 years for the big fashion companies to realize that they have to do something about child labor, and you have to deal with their supply chains. Maybe 5 years from now, Amazon will have to invest seriously into fuel cell trucks because people will start to care about the carbon footprint of delivery. So this type of shifts in consumer attitudes are very, very difficult to model and can change the game.
Well, good. Thank you very much. Let's let the audience ask some questions. If you don't mind coming up to the microphone, I think that's helpful because we're trying to broadcast it live, and without the mic, I don't think people can hear you. So, John? Yeah.
Thank you. Laszlo, thank you very much for your presentation. One of the themes in your presentation is that lots of the dynamism in terms of energy investment is happening in places other than the countries that have been members of IEA historically. And in parallel with that, I know from my own engagement with IEA that one of the efforts that you all have had underway is closer engagements through the association process with countries that aren't members today of IEA, and some may wish never to be so. Could you talk a little bit about how those closer interactions are helping to provide the analytical underpinning for this kind of analysis, and how you see those interactions on trends and investment moving forward?
Thank you. So this is a very, very important question because, of course, the IEA was originally set up as an OECD member organization. Now, ever since Dr. Birol, our new executive director, took up his position, his very first strategic priority is opening the doors and bringing the key emerging countries to the table in global energy governance. And the legal platform for this is called the association process that we signed an association agreement with China. We signed an association agreement with India, Indonesia, Thailand. We are hopeful that things will work out with Brazil as well soon. Such an association agreement specifies a joint work program with the given country, which is tailor-made. So I think it would be a great mistake to take a one-size-fits-all approach. We sit down with the National Energy Administration in China, with the Ministry of Power in India, with the appropriate counterparts, and we define a joint work program. Very importantly, that also includes professional exchanges. So now the IEA now has a permanent IEA liaison office in Beijing. I just realized some weeks ago that I no longer turn my head surprised when I hear Chinese conversation in the cafeteria, because just an advertisement, this year's World Energy Outlook, we have a special dedicated focus on the outlook for the Chinese energy system. And for example, one thing which is practically impossible to do if you are an English speaker analyst using the internet is trying to cover the internal geographical diversity of China. I mean, that's a huge and geographically very diverse country. It cannot be treated as one point in space. It was with the help of the Chinese colleagues that we could build up the modeling capabilities and the analytical capabilities to understand the energy system interactions between the different regions of China and how these interactions evolve with infrastructure development and so on. But also we work very closely with both China and also with other countries on policy design and regulation. So we have been involved in a project where we assessed the lessons from the North American and European gas market liberalization experience, and we tried to identify what are the lessons for the Chinese gas market reform. And again, we didn't tell them to copy-paste either European or either American country, but we tried to identify some common themes. Very similarly, so we are now working with the Indian Ministry of Power to improve the operations and improve the flexibility of the Indian power system. Solar is booming in India, but the solar boom will very soon reach the scale when the flexibility of the rest of the system will become really essential, and that is something which is of keen interest for India. So I would say that I think the number one lesson is to listen to their concerns, understand their priorities, and try to create a work program which is useful for them. And I think this has really created if I compare the IEA of 2011 that I joined with the IEA of the past 2 years, I think I probably spent more working hours with China and India than with our current member states, personally.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Sure. Sorry to make you come up to the microphone, but or we can bring it down.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Laure Nyasu. I'm an economist. You mentioned that you have been working more with China. I've been observing that China is possessing quite a number of mining assets in fragile states, such as the DR Congo, like cobalt, lithium in Ex-Katanga, for instance. And the process is done in order to produce electric cars. Do you think that fragile states and the fact that China is investing in those kind of country can become a kind of game changer?
Yes. Again, let me also contribute with an advertisement of another IEA publication, which we had on the impact of Chinese investment in Africa. And there, the bottom line is that if you take out South Africa, which is a somewhat special case, around half of the electrification of Africa is done by Chinese investment. It is way, way beyond what any Western development agency has ever done in a really significant scale. And if I ask the question of what type of investor would build a power plant in Eritrea, or what type of investor would build a high voltage transmission line from Togo to Benin, these are real projects. It's quite difficult to see who would be the Plan B candidate if China didn't have this go out program. Now, of course, for any investor in fragile states, there are important lessons to be learned, and certainly, China had some difficult experience with the Chinese investments in Yemen, for example, when Yemen experienced a state failure. But we're seeing that overall, China's role in providing energy access in Africa is very significant and often underappreciated.
Can I just ask a follow-up on that? Why don't you come on up to the mic?
Yep.
Sure. Jason and I were just in a conference over in London a couple days ago, and that's Jason Bordoff, by the way, who's the director. Dealing with investment in fragile states, I mean, the classic position is that market investment doesn't like uncertainty. They want transparency, they want rule of law, et cetera, et cetera. There were several people from the financial community in Europe that were making the case that money's actually pouring into these countries now, and that they've reached a point where they're comfortable with many, for example, African states. You talked about China. Are you seeing it outside of China? I mean, have the rules changed that much? Has the risk tolerance changed? Or are we still seeing a reticence on the part of major financial institutions to invest in many countries that don't exhibit sort of those transparency, rule of law, contract, et cetera?
Well, in my previous job in the industry, I was personally involved guiding through an investment project for gas drilling in the Tal Block, which is located in the northwest frontier province of Pakistan, in a quite rough neighborhood. So certainly there is a very significant risk tolerance in the industry. I would even say that I see something like a cultural asymmetry that for many energy investors, they are far more comfortable taking geopolitical risks than taking technological risks.
Right.
Yeah. So the same executive board which approved the Northwest Frontier province of Pakistan kicked me out with a geothermal energy project because that was something that they were not culturally comfortable with.
Yeah, so Nigeria would be a case where you see that. Thank you, please.
Hi, Laszlo. Thank you so much for your presentation. So my name is Colin Brown. I work with the New York Power Authority. And my question has to do with electricity demand. Particularly, you cited the effect of energy efficiency and stagnant demand. So could you just speak from a global view of how the stagnation or decrease in demand, what is the nature of that, in what ways is it decreasing? And also speak a little bit about the increased intensity in barely electrified areas, and then also the impact of electrification, just the overall trends of rising and falling demand.
Okay.
Thank you.
So let me go. I mean, the slowdown and stagnation of electricity demand is a very, very, very industrialized country phenomenon. Okay, so it is a phenomenon of Europe, the United States, Australia, and Japan. And in these societies, the energy efficiency of the appliances certainly plays a role, and asymmetrical recovery from the financial crisis certainly plays a role. So it is not like every industry recovered from the financial crisis with the unified speed. Like the construction sector, was far slower to recover, and that's a very energy-intensive industry. Now, this is an important phenomenon in Europe. In Europe, I believe that some energy-intensive industries will just never recover to that level. In the case of the United States is actually becoming an attractive location for energy efficiency investment on the basis of low domestic energy prices. And last but not least, let's shouldn't forget that 2/3 of GDP growth is captured by the top 1%. So when a hedge fund manager buys his third Ferrari, that doesn't lead to electricity consumption growth. This is what we call economic growth these days. So there is a complex set of factors But overall, we think that that if I combine the energy efficiency potential and structural changes in the economy, it is essentially the IT-related electricity use and electric car-related electric use which is creating demand growth in advanced industrialized countries. Now, in the emerging world, that's a completely different ball game, because while some countries like the India-led program are doing an impressive work to slow down the growth rate of electricity consumption, there's such a big pent-up demand I can tell you that one big controversy was about development financing for a coal-fired power plant in Pakistan, which came up to a formal vote in the governing board of the Asian Development Bank, where the United States under the Obama administration voted with no, and a group of like-minded Asian countries outvoted the United States and approved the financing. Now, Pakistan has roughly as much power generation capacity as the state of Missouri, and it has 200 million people. So there was a group of key Asian decision makers who felt that when a country has such energy fundamentals, they just have to build power generation capacity. Right. So there is a large emerging world out there, and we have this cool 500 terawatt hours per year electricity consumption increase globally.
So we've got them lined up now. This is like coming to LaGuardia at night, so please.
My name is Robert Sill, and I'm a private investor, and I had two questions, one question and a comment. The question was, could you comment a little bit on who's financing this pipeline for gas from Russia to China? Because my understanding was that once the stuff was agreed to in principle, the Russians didn't accept the offers of financing that China offered, number one. And number two, I think it's really crucial to understand that China is not a market economy. China is a state-directed economy. And if you think these people are investing in Africa because they want to just simply earn money, you're totally wrong. They're there because there are two state companies that are allowed to sell armaments, Poly and Great Northern, and they're making investments in part to finance the bird colonels who want to run the countries in Africa. It's a political issue. It's not an economic issue. And the same thing is going on with electric cars now. We saw that solar panels, China became a major player in solar panels by developing the domestic market for solar panels. And now they're going to develop the domestic market for electric cars, and then they're going to export the wits out of them. And they're already limiting the number of batteries, which is the core of the electric car, joint ventures on them, and they're not letting the Japanese and the Koreans who have the technology enter China. So you can't look on it as a market-driven economy. You'll never come to the right conclusions.
Good, well, thank you. Let's get your reactions.
Okay, so the Power of Siberia pipeline, the Russian section is financed on the balance sheet of Gazprom. Even under the current oil and gas prices, Gazprom generates around $20–25 billion of free cash flow annually. They have a large excess production capacity in West Siberia for the time being, they don't have to worry about investing in West Siberia. So they can just roll out the pipeline on their own resources. And given that it's made in Russia, steel pipes and Russian construction companies, most of the costs are in ruble terms. Now, there were indeed media reports about the possibility of China pre-financing the pipeline. Such a pre-financing did take place for the East Siberia Pacific Ocean oil pipeline that China pre-financed. Whether it was Russia who refused it or whether it was China who didn't want to offer it, I don't have any insider information, but certainly it is financed on Gazprom's balance sheet. Now, you are certainly right that the Chinese investments in the African electricity sector are predominantly conducted by state-owned companies, and very often the investment decisions happen to take place right after Xi Jinping visiting the given African country. However, However, I think the people in a village in Zambia where a 10-year-old girl doesn't have to spend 4 hours a day fetching water because they have electricity for the water pumps. Obviously, from this village point of view, I don't think it really matters what was the Chinese motivation in building a hydro plant in Zambia. So I think what needs to be emphasized that Africa is still facing a very significant electrification challenge, and China is playing a very important role in that. And of course, for clean energy technologies, now this is not a secret at all because it's 100% public document. It's published by the National Development and Reform Commission, which identifies key technology areas which will be the focus of China's development strategy, and clean energy is very strongly focusing on it. They have a 100% public and 100% official ambition to have a competitive world-beating clean energy industry. Nobody could claim that this is a secret. This is absolutely public.
Excuse me,
so we've
nobody
got-
said that it was.
We've
It's
got
just
about-
that the American public doesn't understand what the threat is.
So we got to, thank you very much. I don't mean to cut you off. We got about 7 minutes, and I just want to give these two gentlemen a chance. As you approach the mic, one thing that reminded me of, you're talking about access, so women don't have to spend 4 hours gathering water. One of the things we focused on in DOE is that access to electricity around many parts of the world is a major women's rights issue,
Yes.
because when women are forging that far, they're very vulnerable to being preyed upon. Please.
Yes, hi. My name is Waleed, and I manage project capital for oil. It's impossible to go to any oil conference or summit right now without seeing a lot of, especially Gulf region countries, that have their 2020 vision. And in that vision, usually they have tens of billions that's about to go into project capital investment somewhere. So my question is, do we have any visibility as to where they're intending to put it, or if that's not the case, is there sort of visibility on where it would be best allocated?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, so no, that's again a very good question, because if the energy technology and energy policy changes are unfolding as they should, then several important oil producers have, give or take, a decade to forge a competitive, viable, non-oil based economy and diversify their economies. Now, so far, I have to say that those diversification efforts had a very limited success. And in a number of cases, what the various Middle Eastern countries called diversification was essentially selling cheap energy in a different form. Okay, so when a Middle Eastern country is building an aluminum smelter running on subsidized gas-fired power generation and selling the aluminum, that's not really diversification. That's also exporting fossil fuels in a somewhat different form. Now, there are some interesting cases. For example, the way the Emirates and Qatar managed to build themselves up as aviation hubs linking Europe and Asia. That has proved to be quite successful, and that is something which is not going to go out of fashion. Also, some like Oman has a quite lucrative tourism industry, and so on. So there are interesting and promising initiatives here and there, but by and large the clock is ticking for these countries, and they have to take the economic diversification very seriously.
So if I understand you correctly, they're taking all the capital they were originally intending to put into oil investment and diversifying it so they could expand their economies, correct?
Yes, so there's an increasing interest in trying to develop the non-oil sectors of the economy, but I think that this progress needs to be taken very, very seriously in the future.
Thank you.
Hi, I also work in the oil and gas sector. I'm a primary analyst in credit ratings. We have this view for oil and gas, and we're concerned about the offshore sector. we don't see a recovery until later part of
Are you
2019.
talking globally or in the U.S. or?
Mainly, I guess Gulf of Mexico mainly, 2019 in the latter half. What are your thoughts on offshore? Right now, you know, in offshore, break-even prices are probably closer to the $60 range, and then with oil prices continuing to go down, ranging from $45 to $50. What are your thoughts on offshore?
Well, I mean, offshore projects are not created equal. So there are reasonably, some of the most difficult, but also some of the easier oil is also offshore. This overall drive of the industry to manage costs, to manage projects more effectively, that affects the offshore industry as well. I mean, there was fat to be cut. So some consulting firms have some really funny stories about the 37 different shades of yellow paint that the industry was using in offshore platform. And this matters when you have to use a helicopter to deliver a box of yellow paint to the platform. It matters. Now, in the past 3 years, there have been a tremendous focus on simplifying projects, making them more modular, streamlining them, and so on. When BP assessed Mad Dog in the Gulf of Mexico, they thought it would be $20 billion. 3 years later, they completely redesigned the entire concept, and they ended up with 8. Now, Mad Dog at $8 billion is actually a quite reasonable and quite competitive project. Also, the Norwegians are pioneering the systematic application of digitization on offshore operations, which also unlocks a lot of efficiency gains. So I don't think offshore is out of the game, but in general, and that's offshore is not an exception, there is a very strong pressure on cost efficiency and efficient execution.
Thank you. So I think we'll finish up. Jason, you have a few comments?
Hey, Lezo. Thanks for being here. So here's something, here's my question. The idea of peak oil demand, the idea that oil demand may start to gradually decline, we tend to think of supply and demand giving us a certain price, and if demand is lower, prices will be lower. But we have pretty steep decline rates.
Yep.
And even in a world of potentially declining demand, we may continue to need huge amounts of capital investment to offset decline rates. And I'm wondering whether you think lower demand means lower prices, or whether lower demand might spook people from the kind of long-term capital investments that we need, even in a world of declining demand, so that we could actually see more price volatility, more price spikes, because we're not doing enough to offset declines, even in a world of gradually declining or flat demand.
Yep. No, this is a very, very good question. And certainly, Microeconomics 101 would tell you that with lower demand, you have lower prices. And it's a very commonly held belief that with lower demand, you have automatically better supply security. And I think that is a somewhat simplistic view because of two reasons. One is that the policy measures which actually put us on a lower demand trajectory are not going to take place in a political vacuum. In a policy environment where we actually get a post-Paris 2 degrees type oil demand trajectory, a lot of geopolitically secure oil resources here in North America or in Australia or maybe the Norwegian Arctic and so on might face very, very serious political difficulties. Now, the people who say that we need to keep fossil fuels underground, they have to answer one very simple question. That if let's say the Canadian government announces that they will keep fossil fuels underground, what do you expect next day happening? You might have the Russian government announcing that, inspired by the moral leadership of Canada, they also shut down production and keep their fossil fuels underground as well. Or you might have the Russian government announces that thank you very much, Canada, for creating market share for us, and we are going to ramp up production and pump it out to international markets. Which one is more likely? So you might easily have in a lower demand trajectory a shift in the geopolitical composition of oil supply. And also, if you have a structurally lower demand trajectory, you might have low prices for, let's say, 5 years. But then, if those key producers whom we discussed, if they fail in their diversification effort, then they will face a very, very serious political and social stress. And that is also something which is part of the picture. So I think this navigating the trajectory on lower oil demand is not as simple as you reduce demand, prices go down, supply security improves.
Good. Well, we've reached the end of our time, but thank you again, Laszlo. I know you've had a very busy couple of weeks. Thank you for being here at Columbia. Please come back anytime. It's just listening to you, you're obviously a wealth of information. They've clearly got the right man in the job as the chief economist. As I mentioned, a full video recording of the event will be available on our website in the next couple of days. You can also subscribe to our podcast series on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and lots of other strange platforms. As you know, this is one of many events that we do. And the next one is actually IEA again, the IEA Renewable Energy Market Report, which is on Friday, October 13th, 9:30 to 11 a.m., and it's in Lerner Hall in the Sato Room. So please join me in thanking our guest tonight.